Welcome to another episode of Critic.Reading.Writing. My name is Actor Quayson and I am a professor of English at Stanford University. This is going to be the last episode for 2020. So, in the spirit of good cheer leading up to the holidays, I want to share with you today some tips on how to write successfully. Even though I'm hoping that what I'm going to say here will be of value to creative writers, my target is mainly academic writers, especially PhD dissertation students and early career scholars contemplating their first or second book projects. Since taking my PhD in 1995, I have published 6 single-authored monographs and 9 edited volumes from a diverse range of presses, including Indiana University Press, Minnesota University Press, Columbia University Press, Duke University Press, and Cambridge University Press, among various others. I have also published over 100 journal articles and book chapters and have also supervised some 30 successful doctoral candidates and participated in at least 24 PhD committees. These have been from my own home institutions as well as from institutions in different parts of the world. In other words, I have written successfully and also supervised the successful completion of the writing projects of others continually for the past 25 years. It is something of the things that I have learned about writing that I now want to share with you. But first things first. As a general rule, I think it is a good idea to determine your own writing rhythm and to stick to it as much as you can. This means being able to have a good sense of where you work best, under what conditions, and at what times of day. For my own part, I have established 3 productive writing windows spread throughout the day. The first is from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. every morning. This particular time slot is quiet and is when I don't need to worry about phone calls or any interruptions and diversions from anyone. My other productive writing windows are from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., that is to say just before lunch, and 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. These time slots have been my most productive for the past 25 years, and I vary them only when I am traveling or for other reasons beyond my control. Otherwise, I never shift from them. In terms of the optimal conditions for writing, I tend to prefer places that have a door I can close so that I can imagine myself as having shut myself off completely from the rest of the world for the duration of the writing window. I normally have a strict open door policy in my office at work. That is to say, my door is always wide open when students or other people come in to see me, except for during my writing windows, when I shut my door and try not to open it until I'm past the writing phase. I am more flexible at home, but again, my office door is closed whenever I am writing, even in the early morning when the rest of the household is asleep. Some people require a little bit of white noise to be able to write. This is provided either in a cafe setting or by playing some music to listen to while working. Such settings are sometimes useful for certain writing tasks, such as sketching notes or coming up with a work plan. But they are not always good for others, such as writing a first draft of a chapter. I had a friend at university in Ghana many years ago who always wore what he called a thinking cap when he was going to study. This was a battered old hat that he had apparently had since high school. But as soon as he donned that hat, he immediately entered the right mental zone and became completely transformed, whether he was sitting among people or was all by himself. The point is that you must find the conditions that work best for you and stick to them as much as you can. We are often told that to complete a writing project, such as a dissertation or a book, you have to write every single day. This is entirely true and has been attested to by many creative and academic writers. What we are not told, however, is what is entailed in writing every day. What do you actually write every single day? To start with, for people embarking on their PhD dissertations or academic book projects, I think it is very important to understand that the project entails different forms of writing that, if you are lucky, will come all together in an exquisite concatenation of all your efforts. These modes of writing include being able to establish different relations of proximity and distance from your primary materials. For the literature student, this means being able to move from the close reading of details, such as from the level of the individual word, the sentence, and the paragraph of a literary text, to the larger levels of summary and synopsis, and also historical and other contextualization. Some people are better at scrutinizing details, but may end up trapped in them, while others move too quickly to grand generalizations without paying enough attention to details. It is important to strike a balance between proximity and distance, but in a way that is both conscious and productive in terms of the specific disciplinary or indeed interdisciplinary perspective you are writing from. Clearly, the historian or anthropologist or musicologist or geographer will have different elements that constitute for them proximity and distance from inside the individual disciplines. But the point is to be as conscious as possible on the different forms of writing that are required and to practice each of them on a regular basis, sometimes separating them for practice at different times of the writing process. What I have said just now seems overly mechanical and indeed torturous. So I am going to replace it with something more evidently practical and that I strongly advise: the annotated bibliography. Now, the annotated bibliography must be understood not simply as a listing of books that you happen to have read on this or that topic, but rather as the means by which you curate your evolving thought processes. Let me repeat that in a slightly different way. The annotated bibliography is not merely a list of things that you have read, but is rather the means by which you curate your own thought processes. Ideally, the annotated bibliography will have three constitutive elements. First is the full citation information against each item entered in the bibliography. Thus, articles should be cited properly, and books should have the full information regarding name of author, title of book, place of publication, publisher, and date of publication. It is important to get conversant with a particular citation style and to know it very well. For scholars in English and the humanities, the Modern Languages Association Handbook is highly recommended. But people in the social sciences have other options, such as the Chicago Style Sheet and that of the American Psychological Association, among others. Getting conversant with one citation style to start with is very useful, because then it is relatively easy to switch to different styles when required to by different journal or publication formats. Learning to list items properly is a really useful practice as you embark on your dissertation or book, since the annotated bibliography also acts as a really useful storage and retrieval system of ideas and information that you can quickly transfer for use elsewhere. The second element of the annotated bibliography is a brief summary of the content of each entry. These summaries do not need to be elaborate, but their function is to help you remember quickly what the text you read was about. As a general rule, the more quirky the details you can incorporate into the summary, the more likely you will be able to remember the entire article or book in question. The third and perhaps most important part of your annotation is your response to what you have read. Here, the responses should be of different kinds. Sometimes you can simply write down what you agreed or disagreed with in the text. At other times, you will write down the ideas that have been instigated in your mind regarding your own project. You should always allow yourself to follow these threads in your own mind. Also, really important thing is to note what links to other items in the annotated bibliography are invoked in your mind by a particular entry. Establishing the links between items may sometimes require you to go back and forth across the annotated bibliography to add more material against a particular entry. For a creative writer, the second and third steps of the annotations will involve writing down your observations about the writing style of the authors whose work you are reading. These observations will include things such as notes on characterization, on focalization, on the parameters of space and time, on ethical sensibilities. and most important of all, on devices of language. The noting of echoes to other works is an aspect of the curatorial function of the annotated bibliography, because what you are actually doing is that you are gradually setting out certain patterns and linkages that you have observed in what you have read. These patterns and linkages can then act as important pathways for you to construct your own thoughts and ideas. In many respects, this is by far the most important function of the annotated bibliography for your own writing process. As you develop in your writing, you will find that it is not everything that you would like to annotate. But as a habit, it is useful to annotate at least the things that you find most important, since, as I mentioned earlier, the annotated bibliography is not simply a list of items you have read, but a means by which you set out your own thoughts. As you may have guessed by now, the annotated bibliography provides one good avenue for writing every single day. And through it, you will be practicing the different forms of proximity and distance I spoke about earlier. It is also important to note that you can annotate both primary and secondary sources, and that patterns of discovery can be traced across both. Ideally, there should be an annotated bibliography for each chapter of the dissertation or book project you're working on. In this way, you will be curating your thoughts for each section of the writing project in a way that feels autonomous and yet also interconnected. Now you've got the perfect work rhythm. You have found a nice and quiet place to sit where you can write without being disturbed. Your computer is open before you, and yet nothing is coming. Try as you might, you are still not writing. You are facing a writer's block. When this happens, you will likely go through a series of emotions, some stronger than others, depending on how deep the writer's block is. You may feel slightly irritated or depressed, or you may feel you need another cup of coffee and yet another cup of coffee, or whatever your beverage of choice is. Suddenly, you feel that this is a really good time to sort out your messy wardrobe or kitchen, or to call your estranged sister so that you can have a good old quarrel with her. You think you need to get your affairs in order before you can start writing, and you spend sporadic bursts of time trying to do just that. And yet the writing just won't come. While writer's block may be experienced in a variety of ways, at the heart of it is some low-grade anxiety about the writing process itself. You fear that you are going to fail at what you are writing. This does not manifest itself as a clear thought, but is rather expressed as a series of acts and gestures that prevent you from actually getting down to the business of writing itself. In my own case, I have difficulties when I'm embarking on something that is way outside of my scholarly ambit, and for which I feel a little bit incompetent or even something of an interloper. It took me all of 8 months to write my chapter on Samuel Beckett in Tragedy and Postcolonial Literature, my most recent book. And this is in spite of the fact that I had already written a separate chapter on Beckett in an earlier book, as well as a journal article that had been published shortly after that. And yet, I still felt that I just didn't know enough about Beckett to be able to write properly about his relationship to postcolonial tragedy. I started the chapter and stopped several times, and finally set it aside to work on other parts of the book. It was only when I acknowledged what was blocking me that I was finally able to start work on Beckett. Over the years, I've devised what I think is a simple formula for dealing with writer's block, which, despite my productivity, I too suffer from time to time, as I've just mentioned. What I do when I start to get blocked is to read a really difficult book that I can barely understand, the reading of which requires me to concentrate especially hard to make any sense of it. For many years, my book of choice during episodes of writer's block was Theodore Adorno's Minima Moralia. In fact, I have several copies of Minima Moralia scattered in different parts of my house as well as in my office at work. And it is also one of the books that I travel with most regularly. The advantage of Adorno's book is that it is a collection of aphorisms that cover a wide range of things. What I like most about Adorno's writing is that even in translation, you can still catch the quality of his thinking, which is often expressed in choice turns of phrase. The aphorisms are not supposed to be understood all at once, or even after several readings. In fact, for me, the less I understand of what I'm reading to get out of my writer's block, the better. Here is one of my favorite aphorisms from Minima Moralia. It is also a part of morality not to be at home in one's own home. Here, lots of elusive concepts are presented. The self, morality, home, and alienation are just a few that readily come to mind. And the aphorism can be interpreted in a variety of ways, none of them entirely satisfactory. The point for me then is that during my writer's block phase, I have to read something whose meaning I cannot grasp immediately. But what is really happening is that whatever it is that I'm reading for my writer's block, I am at the same time subliminally also processing my own writing. All I am doing is trying to find a trigger to set me off toward my writing. Sometimes the trigger comes very quickly through a pleasant turn of phrase in what I am reading, and sometimes it takes a few pages. As a matter of fact, I have specific pages of Minima Moralia that I always go to first before I read other parts of the book, because often those well-thumbed sections readily provide the triggers that I need to get into my own writing. In my entire professional life, this practice has never failed to get me into my own mental writing zone. And it is not always Adorno that I use, by the way. I have also turned to the aphorisms of Kierkegaard and William Blake, and the philosophy of Walter Benjamin and Wittgenstein. You can also use the work of other scholars whose work you really admire. In my case, the work of Eric Averbach, Stephen Greenblatt, Pauline Homtonji, Valentin Mudimbe, and J. Hillis Miller, randomly sampled, have served this purpose on and off at different times throughout my own career. The key point is that for you to overcome writer's block, you have to read something as far away from what you are writing as possible, and that ideally the two should have no relationship to each other whatsoever. Once you start writing, you can set your writer's companion aside and not go back to it until the next episode of writer's block. Now, having overcome your writer's block, you may be confronted by a slightly different but also seemingly intractable problem, which is how to write and continue to write over several hours, days, weeks, and perhaps even months. Everyone will likely have their own methods for starting and sustaining their writing. But I have developed a specific writing routine that I like to call the ebb and flow method of writing. I call it ebb and flow not to demarcate the negative and positive poles of the process, but to suggest that the entire toing and froing that one experiences when writing can be channeled by you into a productive process of creation. The ebb and flow method entails a number of simple steps that have to be repeated diligently throughout the writing process. Many years ago, when I first started working on my PhD dissertation, I used to write everything out in longhand before transferring it onto the computer. This habit has changed dramatically with my greater familiarity and indeed reliance on the computer. But there is an aspect of writing by hand that I have retained for what I'm going to describe for you now. Basically, what I do first is to open a blank Word document and then to just start writing whatever comes into my mind, whether it pertains to the subject matter of my project or not. It doesn't really matter. I will continue writing until I feel I have dried out of things to say. Often, when starting a new writing piece, this point of first stop may be a mere 500 words in, sometimes even slightly shorter. The next thing I do is to print off these first 500 or so words. I then go back and start revising the piece from the beginning by hand, and this time with a pen or pencil. Two things tend to happen when you are revising your own work, whether by hand or on the computer. First is that you tend to see things you feel need to change at all levels of the writing, from word choices to word order through entire thought clusters and the structuring of your ideas. However, what is important about the revision process is that by entering this process, you have actually activated a skeptical interlocutor inside of your own mind. What I am calling the skeptical interlocutor is part of the dialogical mental structure that you require to actually get any good writing done. But the skeptical interlocutor that you activate during the course of revision has a specific function, which is not to be critical of what you are doing, but to open up different reservoirs of thoughts and ideas that you can tap into. Because the truth is that as soon as you start revising, you are not just correcting yourself, but you are opening up different language and conceptual resources by which to enrich your writing. So, say you were revising and came across the word red, and you suddenly felt an impulse to change that word to burgundy. The word burgundy will likely import into your mind a whole cluster of implications and ideas that stretch from the color itself to its symbolic value as connoting the name of a wine, as well as other concepts that are tied to both color and drink. In other words, the revision of a word, a sentence, or an idea imports into your mind other words, sentences, and ideas. As I am reading and revising what I have just written, I will festoon the paper with several arrows going in different directions and looping in and out of the original typescript. I will also scribble other ideas in the margins that I think might need to be further elaborated, and also scripted alternative phrases and sentences as they strike me. Sometimes I will have to stop and consult the dictionary or a thesaurus to find some synonyms or other cognate words to jostle with those that have come to mind. At all times, the relationship of revision is a dialogical one because you are actually in dialogue with the skeptical interlocutor that you have activated inside of your own mind. The next step is to go back to the computer and to input the various revisions that you have made to your first draft of 500 words. You will find that very quickly the first 500 words will expand to maybe 1,000 words or even 1,500 words, all depending on how focused you have been during the process of revision. And now comes the really hard part. For me, I print out whatever I have got to in this revised version and then go back to the beginning to start the process of revision from the first word again. Let me repeat this. I do not print the document out and start revising from where I last stopped, but rather go back to start revising from the very beginning again. Going back to the beginning also means that I'm going to continue the exact same relationship that I started with my pen or pencil and with my skeptical interlocutor. Again, things will be opened up that I didn't think of before, and again, I will festoon the document with arrows and other marks, and again, all these will generate more ideas for further writing. I now go back to the computer to input my revisions that may now expand the document to maybe 2,000 or even 3,000 words. I stop, print it off, and restart the entire process again from the beginning. This effectively means that for, say, a 20-page double-spaced essay I am writing, I will have returned to the beginning some 60 to 80 times. And each time I write anything, the process is exactly the same. I should point out, however, that what I describe as the very beginning will likely also shift as you proceed in the piece you are working on. You will find that after returning several times to the very start of the document, that no revisions come to mind. This means that your skeptical interlocutor or dialogical self is satisfied with that section for the time being. Rather, it is maybe from page 5 that all the many fresh ideas spring up to your mind when you are revising. Page 5 will then become your beginning for revision purposes until that section is also exhausted. The next threshold may then be page 9, and so on and so forth. The point, however, is that you must listen to your skeptical interlocutor, but not be hampered or blocked by it. They are an aid and not an enemy. You need to activate them and use them to assist you in your writing process. This is what I call the ebb and flow mode of writing. Sometimes you may find that to revise what you are writing properly, you really have to stop completely and go to the library to read up some more before coming back to it. It is very important, however, to establish an ongoing dialogical relationship also between your reading and your writing. As a general rule, if you read when you are not writing, you tend to forget what you've read. The way to prevent this is to always annotate what you read in your annotated bibliography, which, as we saw earlier, acts as an interactive space in which you curate your own processes of thought. This way, your reading and your writing are constantly enriching each other, even when you are not going directly from reading and back to writing. Your reading is thus incorporated into the ebb and flow method and is a seamless part of your writing process. You do not have to read and read and read, then write and write and write. You can do both in active interaction with each other. The ebb and flow process of writing that I have just described may stretch over several days, weeks, or even months. But it is important to be able to replicate the different segments of your workflow as you proceed. As I have described them here, each aspect of your workflow is tied to a particular writing need. And so, to put matters in more or less schematic form, finding your writing space and rhythm helps you to get into the right mental zone as quickly as possible. The annotated bibliography serves the purpose of helping you to curate the flow of your thoughts as related to different modes of proximity and distance to your primary subject or topic. The writer's block can be attenuated by reading something difficult or elusive, but whose purpose is to incite or trigger your own thought processes for writing. While the ebb and flow mode of writing is designed to activate the skeptical interlocutor inside of your own mind, whose purpose is to open up different reservoirs of thought for you. In this way, you will write every day of your life and write well too. Thank you very much and happy holidays to everyone. If you like this episode, remember to give a thumbs up, subscribe and share, hit the notifications bell so that you do not miss any upcoming episodes, and enter your comments in the section below. See you next year.